everybody. It's Friday afternoon at Battlesite. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Vogt, the Chief Operating Officer here at Battlesite, and I want to introduce some of the folks who are joining us for this discussion. We've got to my right here Nick Riplinger, who's the President of Battlesite, Army veteran, retired. We also have Dan Reed, who is our Director of Product and Technology, Air Force retired officer. Sorry, Nick enlisted, Dan officer. And then right next to me is our Director of Sales and Marketing, Dean Martinez, who is also Air Force retired, enlisted. So that'll all be important here in a minute when I introduce our topic today. But here at Battlesite, in the course of a week, we have a lot of really interesting discussions. And they're not all sort of Battlesite product related, obviously, but they are what I kind of call Battlesite adjacent. And one of the things that's Battlesite adjacent for us from day one is kind of veterans issues. And we are all in on the warfighter for the products that we develop, but we're also all in on the veteran, as this illustrious group indicates. So we participate pretty actively in the Skill Bridge program. And obviously, we put our money where our mouth is, and we hire veterans and transition them into this business on the civilian side. And that's kind of the topic that came up today. So I'll quickly set the table, and then I want to turn it over to really the subject matter experts here. But earlier this week, we got a post from one of Dean's buddies. And basically, this guy is, after a relatively long career, how many years?
26.
26 years in the military. Is now facing retirement and transitioning out of the military. And his post was basically about lamenting the fact that none of the skill sets that he acquired, by virtue of his job description in the Air Force, translate to the civilian world. And Dean shared that with us earlier in the week. I read the post and immediately kind of had a visceral reaction to it, because although I'm not prior military, now going on 9 years with this business and working with a lot of military folks, it just feels like that is a narrative that continues to pop up and could not be less true. So that's our topic today. We wanted to talk through it with these guys, share some of their experiences and their opinions on it. And at this point, I kind of open it up, and who wants to start? Nick, you want to shed some light on sort of this experience and where you are on it as a subject?
Yeah. So I think, like, full disclosure, I got out in 2011. So it's 15, 16 years now. Dean and Dan have more relative experience getting out, like, within the last 24 months or so. But I want to say it was like 2015, like, I legit wrote a book on this, because I think for such a long period of time, there's been this issue of, and I don't know if it's like a retention type of tool or people just don't know about how, like, you're super young in the military and given a ungodly amount of responsibility for people, equipment, budgets, everything, and all that directly translates to it. I don't think, like, us as a community that supports veterans or the Department of War or the transition programs or anything has come up with a great way of how do you translate those stories that land on like your desk as somebody who's interviewed a lot of people and have hired a lot of people, to be able to make those connections. I mean, I don't know how many veterans you've hired, before Battlesite, but obviously you have a long track record of hiring veterans here and see the value and understand how those, stories and those experience translates directly into our business. So
I think it works on both sides. Like, I think there's also a false narrative on the civilian side.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of hiring veterans coming out of the military and what type of skill sets they have and how they could work for you. I think there's also a little bit of that narrative on the civilian side too. So it cuts both ways. It's the guys coming out who are saying, hey, my job doesn't lend itself to a natural job on the civilian side. It's also the civilian hiring managers who are saying, hey, what do I do with a 26-year Air Force vet, without knowing sort of what kind of responsibility a master sergeant has, at that point in their career and what they've accomplished, as an example. And the things they were responsible for, and how much team and leadership and team building skills they have as part of that military career.
Exactly. So I think there's some companies that do a really good job and have put a focus on it and have trained their people what to look for. I do also think there's kind of that fog of, honestly, probably going back to Vietnam, of like, is this actually a risk for the business versus is this an asset for the business?
Yeah, Dean, you talked a little bit about sort of trying to get out of that mold of security services and the things that you can go into after that.
Yeah, I think that, for me, it was often discussed like you have these skills that only align with like being a policeman afterwards or being in some sort of, security service afterwards, because the focus was like kind of on the tangible, hands-on skills that we learned, and less about like some of those more intangible things that you talked about earlier, like the art of leadership. How do I have this job that has to get done, and I have these 20 guys that I need to get that job done. How do I, motivate and inspire those guys to do the job because they want to, and not kind of like have to force them to get the job done in a shabby way, but get the job done in a way that like they can be proud of, that I can be proud of. And so the military is really good at that, is like saying, hey, here's the end result that I want. And there's an expectation because you're in a leadership role, whether that's, an E5 or an E7, like you have to figure out how to get these guys to do this thing. Well, that's not what's discussed when they talk about like transferable skills in the military. It's often like, this is what you were trained to do, so this is the only thing that's translatable on the outside, right?
Is it safe to say it's more like they talk about like the tactical, technical tactical type skills transition?
Yeah, and I think
versus like the soft skills.
Exactly. That's exactly what we talked about the other day. It was like the soft skills, right? Like, it's you can pass a course and learn how to be an investigator or to investigate traffic accidents or stuff like that. And those are certifications that can carry you forward, and that's something you can put on a resume. And so that's a lot more tangible than like, when you see resumes, it's very rarely do you see like, I did this work task to this ability with this group of people. And because it's hard to put the reader in the context of that situation to help them understand the skills that were required to get that job done. And that's where I think we don't do a good job as veterans or as like transitioning military members, is understanding like the magic that has to happen in order for all these things that we accomplished over our career to get done. We don't even give it the value that it deserves. But I think that's where there's a gap in this whole understanding of what's translatable and what's not, Like, yeah, some of the, obviously the certifications, that translates. Yeah. But like for me, for my example, I didn't want to be a police officer after the military. I wanted to do something completely different, something that challenged me personally, intellectually. And so a lot of the skills and the certifications I got in the military didn't really translate for me. But what did translate was my ability to talk to people, my ability to understand body language and understand where people are coming from, to figure out how to get, this thing from point A to point B. It's like, I don't have the roadmap, the battle site roadmap for in this specific example, right? But I know I can learn it because I've been challenged throughout my career and I've understood what it took to adapt to different environments. And I was never given, it was a lot of times throughout my military career, I wasn't given a roadmap. They were just like, this is the end result we want. These are the resources you have to make that happen. Figure it out, And so that skill is totally translatable. That just ability to adapt and kind of overcome regardless of the scenario you've been put in. And I think that's where there's a lot of value in that.
Well, I think the biggest problem isn't necessarily that veterans have the skills that the civilian world desires, right? The biggest issue here is we have a very myopic point of view whenever we're active duty. My perspective isn't what is my next transition goal, it's how can I best benefit the Air Force, right? And so I'm always looking at it in that lens, through that perspective. And if I don't end up looking at what all am I doing? Like, am I leading? Am I doing maintenance on aircraft, or am I in a combat situation? Like, you don't look at those particular things as transferable to the civilian world. It's almost like, how can I take those skills that I've learned and then transition into the civilian world? And that's the wrong perspective, because there's not a whole lot of military type or combat oriented skills that translate well. So when I was enlisted and before I commissioned, my biggest thing was, well, if I stay TAC-P or if I stay special warfare, I'm going to have to transition into something relatable. right? I'm either going to go into contract close air support, or I'm going to go into the FBI HRT, or I'm going to go border patrol. Those are the only skills that I've got. And that's incorrect. Like, you have all this leadership skills, you have all this writing skills and vocalization skills that people don't
Planning,
understand
preparing, like all the
translates
stuff
well.
that goes into like before you go do that, air mission. Like, there's a ton of stuff that leads up to that. That is all very, in my opinion, like totally tangible to a lot of business situations.
But we say those are soft skills, and I think Chris was accurate last week when he said those aren't soft skills, those are business skills, right? Those are very tangible, those are very oriented towards almost any civilian market or any civilian profession.
And hard skills to teach on the civilian side. You can go get an MBA, but that doesn't make you a good manager of people and process. That is takes years of training and situational experience for you to become a good manager of processes and people. You don't just go take a 2-year MBA program and come out a good manager. And I think that's something that at certain levels, I think we should caveat this. Like, we're talking about individuals who now have had, a military career. I don't know whether that's 10 years or 15 years or 20 years before you can say that was my military career. Obviously not talking about somebody who enlisted and did their mandatory 3 or 4 years and then got out. But by the time you've been in that long and been promoted, you have proven yourself to be a leader. You've proven yourself to be promotable, and you've proven yourself to be able to take on new processes and challenges and be successful at that. And you have learned management skills, both of people and of process, and that's hard to teach.
I kind of want to push back just a tiny bit on that, because they even think like the, men and women who did their 3 or 4 years or whatever, they've been exposed to so many different leadership styles, good and bad, in the military, that they might not have that proven track record like you were just talking about, but they've seen what right looks like and they've seen what wrong looks like. And in theory, they should be able to, carry those type of things forward a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately, when you think about it through that lens, like if you take a 23-year-old human being that just spent the last 4 years of their life in the military, or a 23-year-old human being that just spent their last 3 or 4 years in college, like they might have learned a lot, potentially, but the firsthand experience is missing, and so there's a value in just that 4-year enlistees,
Yeah, I think
time
that
and
Chris
service.
was just hitting on that with
Yeah,
comparing
yeah.
it to the NBA, right? Like, I would take experience over formal education any day of the year. Like that's a proven thing. Like, there's results back there, and there's references you go pull or whatever to like really show that documented experience and like, did it work, or were you good or were you not good, right? Where colleges, right?
We talked about that here at Battle Site quite often, because it's hard to find those skills like we just found in Dean, just pulling somebody in from college. But anybody we can teach when they come in to write a proposal, anybody we can teach to do certain things in our laboratory, or we can think, but thinking outside the box, having, if you're a social butterfly or if you're able to communicate well, those are very hard skills to find. And
if you kind of pull that string like one step further, right? We talk about this all the time too, is like hire for culture. We can teach those technical skills like you just mentioned, and being on a small team or any type of team at all, right? You get 1 or 2 bad culture fits, it can have devastating effects.
100%, especially on a small team, yes.
So I think it cuts both ways. Like, the folks coming out of the military don't really have an appreciation perhaps for how valuable their learned skill set is in the civilian world, even though it isn't job title to job title correlation, right? So there isn't really an understanding that that skill set of assessing a problem, sort of the whole improvising, adapting, and overcoming barriers, leading teams and being part of highly functional teams, and managing people and processes, all feel like sort of the day-to-day job to the military person. But on the civilian side, those are actually really very important skills to have, regardless of what the function is. If you can run people, you can run people for a whole variety of functions, right? And then on the civilian side, there's just a general misunderstanding of, like, just as an example, the enlisted ranks. Like, what kind of responsibility does a tech sergeant have? I'm a hiring manager in Fortune 500 or Fortune 100. I don't really know. He's got a lot of job descriptions on here and things he did, but I don't know what kind of responsibility level a tech sergeant has, for example.
We also do a bad job of relating what that actually means to civilian.
Yeah, and that's another thing is like the military resumes coming out 7 to 8 pages long.
I wanted to bring this up because I reviewed Dean's original resume.
It's not
this
really
morning.
what the hiring managers are looking for to be able to sort of judge things.
Right.
It's more of sort of your complete transcript, sort of if you use an education analogy, it's your transcript of your military service versus your resume.
But so there's like two things that you said I just want to like foot stomp real fast. When you're talking about, those small guy teams and, that tech sergeant type leadership, and I don't care what it is in the military, like there's lives on the line where you don't really have too many lives you have careers on the line in the business world where even if you're going out to maintain something, if something goes wrong, like people can die very easily. So I do think like that's another thing that kind of needs to be communicated to these hiring managers is like they were in actually meaningful leadership roles where people's lives were on the line, not just, a sale or whatever.
There's a level of professionalism that comes with that's like that can't really be taught without being put in those volatile situations.
Absolutely. I definitely want to talk about the resume because I like almost threw up when I read Dean's resume this morning.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of inside the fence.
Yeah.
Like intended for audiences inside the fence.
Yeah, and I get, right, especially we were talking about this earlier today, even like when we're talking about AI and stuff, like you're not like it's not a person at the end of those reading all those resumes. Like so many are getting filtered out through tools and systems, and that's been going on long before AI. But the resume thing has got me hot for some reason. So sorry to derail.
Well, back to your one point, Chris, about us not understanding as a military member what the civilian community looks like, and the civilian community doesn't know what the military member does. But that's part of my myopic point of view is that there's very few military members that actually get any experience with the outside world once they're active duty. So if you're in acquisitions or if you're in contracting or PMing, that's their whole role, right? It's almost like the business arm of the Air Force. So they're out working with companies like Lockheed or Northrop or whatever. And then you also have other communities like the soft community. They're always out integrating with civilian tech companies. So they get a very firsthand perspective of what these capabilities are and what kind of people are being hired there. And they can see how they're performing and they can translate that very well to their own personal skills. But as far as like a guy on a flight maintainer, right, on the flight line, he has no clue. He is not working with anybody out there. He is only under the assumption that people on the civilian market are probably doing something better than he is. And doesn't have the skills to be relevant or competitive in that market, and that's just incorrect.
So
Yeah, good point.
I mean, I think we saw that we hired or skill bridged a maintainer here recently, and there was like some culture shock when he's like, I mean, I think we're a pretty unique company, but two, it's so wildly different than I'm gonna punch in at 7:30, I'm gonna go fix airplanes, I'm gonna punch out at 4, I'm gonna go work out, and then I'm gonna
Talking about that yesterday.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a different world.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. I will say that, like in a different way, because like a lot of my roles in the military were dynamic like that, where every day it was something different. Here is definitely like that. Like every day could be derailed by
It's every hour.
right, exactly. And so that back to the adaptability and just like rolling with the punches is kind of something that has to happen. So like when you find yourself going from a very structured environment, like it may be a lower pay grade in the military, where it's like, your job is to kind of just punch in and punch out kind of thing. You're worried about yourself or your small team, and then that's kind of the box that you're in, right? And then you get into one of these situations where things are just unpredictable. And if you have somebody that's not really accustomed to that level of unpredictability, that can be a steeper learning curve for that kind of person, which goes back to what you guys were saying about culture, like just finding that right fit. And so like there is a definite fit, I think, even in business for people that have that level of structure but we're a research and development company. I mean, everything is kind of always evolving and changing. So making sure you have the right fit.
Something new data point.
Right, exactly. Making sure you have the right fit with that. But that goes back to like, what you just said about my resume. Like without knowing the audience, you kind of default back to what you know.
Yeah.
Because you can't really tailor it for what you think you're going to be using it for, right?
Well, you also think you need to include everything in your resume. Like, I don't want to leave something out that somebody's going to find valuable, so I'm going to add it all.
Yeah, exactly.
And you get somebody like
exactly.
me who's like, I'm gonna read like I'm gonna spend like 25 seconds on it. Like, I'm not getting through 7-8 pages in that amount of time.
So on the military side of this, I mean, where does this come from, this like sort of perpetual drinking the Kool-Aid? How do you combat that? Hopefully this video does, something to encourage the folks who are contemplating, leaving the military and transitioning to the civilian side of things, that they have, an entire toolkit full of very valuable skills. But it's just like Nick and I have had this discussion probably 10 times over the years. It just keeps regurgitating back to the surface, this sort of drinking of the Kool-Aid that what I do to defend the country does not translate into the civilian world.
So that's a great question. I don't think you can. And here's why. The Air Force, or the military in general, is very good at trying to maintain their retention standards. If they're always focusing on how your skills are transferable to the civilian market, or what you could be doing to make yourself more competitive, that's going to be in people's minds the entire time. My job is to make sure that you stay here and that I have the numbers that I need in order to complete our mission. If I'm prepping you to do that, I have that potential loss. So I don't want to do that. But the Air Force or the military recognize that this is a problem, because we have lots of transition issues with people who are retiring, and they didn't do well when they got out, right? Because their life was structured in a certain way that wasn't necessarily compatible with civilian market, which is why they invented the TAPS program. So that's a 3-week program, right, that tries to get people...
3 weeks now?
Yeah.
It was like 3 days when I got out.
Oh, maybe it is. Maybe it's 3 days.
Nick's favorite quotes was, they spent a long time teaching me to be a soldier, and they spent an afternoon teaching me how to be a civilian.
And maybe it is. Maybe it's been a couple years since I've done it. Mine was online. Maybe it's a week. So I think mine was 3 days. Yeah, it was the middle of COVID, right? So nobody was going to do anything in the office. But the whole point there was to try to say, hey, these are the skills that you do. We're going to help you write a resume. This is what you should wear to an interview. But at that point, you're dealing with people who've been in the military for 20 years. They're already indoctrinated to the point where they're like, that doesn't make any sense to me, or I haven't had any, practice doing any of this. So they try to do practice interviews. They do all that stuff, but it's not enough.
So my funny tap story is, they're like, all right, pair up with people and you're going to mock interview each other. And I sit down with this super cool guy, amazing career. He's a sergeant major, a SOF organization. And we sit down, like, hey, sergeant major. Like, even then, like, the transition didn't really click, right? He's still senior to me. He's still calling him by rank and everything in this setting where we're all supposed to be peers. But also, like, go ahead and start us off. He's like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm like, that makes 2 of us. And we like spend an hour kind of like just talking about random stuff, and got our paper signed off so we can continue out processing. Like, yeah. I am glad to hear that, like, they're adding more time, and it sounds like they're bringing in some professionals.
I will say that, like, we had some people from the Department of Labor show up that kind of talked to, like, translatable skills, but it didn't seem like that person that was briefing us really knew our skills to understand how they'd be translatable. And so I think, it's like everything else, the person doing the briefing has to be a subject matter expert in both sides of that equation to be able to understand both sides so they can adequately prepare people. So I think there is money to be made in that space, because like Dan said, there's the retention concern, and there are a lot of career fields that do have translatable skills. Like a buddy of mine, crane operator in the military, right? He could have separated at the end of his enlistment, doubled his pay by going a block away and getting a job as a crane operator at like a steel recycling place, right? So super translatable. So how do you keep that person in the military?
Well, it's the same thing with medical and pilots.
Right. So there are some of those, you have to be creative about how you retain those people, because there is an incentive for them to go make money, and be more successful on the outside. So they could just come in, use the military to get those certifications, and then bounce right away and go use them somewhere else. Then the military suffers because they lose some experience. They have to retrain somebody else, and so on and so forth. So I think that it's worth the time, at least in TAPS, to have those conversations.
And I think here's how you combat that, though, right? You build good, purpose-driven organizations. I don't think there's much bigger purpose than the military, protecting the homeland, defending freedom, and everything that the military is really good at. But I don't think that necessarily always trickles down to like the smaller organizations. Like if you're a crane operator and you're just, picking up stuff and moving it from A to B, like how does that function inside that small group and that small organization?
The other program that they did, I thought that works really well, is SkillBridge. We've already talked about that. SkillBridge is probably the best thing that they've done so far, but I can see why the DoD or DOW is trying to get rid of it, right? Because you're getting rid of some of your great people for 6 months at the end of their term, and it kind of hurts their numbers because you can't backfill that position if somebody is out at SkillBridge, right?
Like Chris, let me ask you this, because we've done, I don't know, 6 or 7 skill bridges now, and from all different career fields, from all different like service members' desire for what they wanted, right? One guy wanted to start a small business and just come learn from us. Totally cool, right? Dean and Dan were like, hey, we want to come skill bridge because we want to work here one day, and kind of everywhere in between. Like when we were talking about the corporate side of things, not necessarily knowing what these, tech sergeants, master sergeants, we mostly pull from the Air Force using those, but like call it E5 to E8 type range of service members that have come through here. Like how eye-opening has it been from your perspective as a, a career corporate guy, who's been working with the military for the last 10 years or so here at Battle Site, but from the day-to-day operations and having them here in the shop, and I guess what are your big takeaways from that?
Yeah, I think, and this was my point earlier, like kind of the time and rank equation. Like, just talking specifically about a category of E5 to E7, for example, there's time and rank associated with those guys making it to that position. So, and because they've made it to that position, they've had a certain number of career experiences, and they've been tasked with managing some important processes, and in some cases, hundreds of people. That's kind of lost on some people on, outside the military, that some of these management responsibilities include hundreds of people and their careers and things like that. So I think for me, for that E5 to E7 and working with them so much, the biggest revelation for me.
Hang on a second. It's blinking again now. I don't know what just happened.
We still okay?
Yeah, it looks like it cut out and then started again.
Yeah, the biggest revelation for me is just how capable those guys are and how much great training they have on like encountering a problem, how they approach it, how they get the team behind it, how they test their hypotheses, how they get together after they've tested the hypotheses and sort of do a hot wash on what happened, what we're going to do next. I mean, they're very like process driven in terms of how they're trained. And I just find that really enlightening and refreshing. And it's like when I hear people say, well, my stuff doesn't translate, it's like, are you kidding me? Just the ability to do that, to have something thrown at you that you don't understand and you're not a subject matter expert in, and to be able to take it apart and assemble a team to address it and figure out how you're going to go test the solution. Obviously we're a big R&D firm, but that translates to a whole bunch of different problems. And I think that, E5 to E7 community, they have that all drilled into their head by the time they reach those ranks. And that to me was a revelation, like that, the enlisted ranks are not just, they're solving real problems on their own with their own group of assembled guys.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that gets lost in translation.
I think a lot of it comes down to the never fail, never quit type mindset that's beat into, at least on the Army side of things.
Yeah.
From day one of basic training all throughout your career, because these are like real world missions that have massive implications.
Yeah, failure's not an option.
You can never train that on a college campus or in some curriculum or some certification program.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and speaking about the education piece, that reminds me, we were talking the other day about, I think a lot of the drive to talk about the transferable, translatable skills was almost like incentive to educate the force. Because for a while, I mean, it was, the push was to get your associate's degree. Everyone, should, by the time they're in E7, E6 in the Air Force, they wanted everyone to have their at least associate's degree done, right? And then it became kind of more like, well, if you want to be of any value on the outside, you have to have a degree that like corporation or a civilian agency is going to understand, because that helps your skills to be more like relevant to their perspective, right? And so there was this huge push for everyone to get educated, which is, I mean, it's a good thing, obviously, for them to get their education, because a lot of the guys we're seeing in SkillBridge right now are coming out with degrees, you know, even at the E5, E6
Most
level.
educated enlisted force who's ever had.
Exactly.
I know PhDs that are E6s, E7s. I mean, it's amazing the amount of, you know, brain power our military has right now.
Right. So I do like that aspect, but I think that was also a big reason why people started to like kind of panic and realize, oh no, like I've been doing this for however long in the military and none of my skills are translatable. I need to start going to school to you know, build these things that I can put on my resume that are relatable to an employer outside of the military, you know, which is a good incentive, but I think that's where a lot of this problem stemmed from, was like, hey, look, you guys are going to be kind of out of luck when you separate from the military, because your certifications that you hold in the military aren't going to be translatable on the outside. So you need to go to school and get an MBA, or you need to go get, you know, an HR degree, or PMP was a big one that everyone was pushing, some, you know, different certifications that were recognizable to an employer on the outside.
There's several amazing like nonprofits there to help you get those certifications, like Onward to Opportunity. I know they offer the PMP. So there's so many resources outside of the military and outside of like traditional hiring things that, you know, I think that word needs to kind of spread like wildfire on that front.
I was about to say, I've never heard of that company. Yeah, so there's a lot of places out there that, where people.
It's not even a company, it's like a program under IVMF, but.
Got it. Yeah, I never heard of IVMF until you brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, how do you get that word out? So, right, it's not just the four of us sitting around shooting a video, right? I think that's kind of the challenge there. And I think like, veterans in general kind of suck at telling their story, right? We're all fairly humble. We all know somebody who's like more badass than us in the military, and like downplaying, you know, what those accomplishments are, which I think is kind of the root cause of a lot of this.
Yeah, I will say that's like, I started working on my resume and trying to like, you know, build in statements that were kind of a brag. Felt so icky that I was like, I'm just going to put all my records in AI and see what it says.
We have kind of bashed Dean's resume.
I mean, it was terrible. It's worthy of bashing. Like,
Not intended, not totally intended, Dean, but you just became the poster child.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay. It speaks to the problem though.
but like, I think like back when I was like super junior enlisted, I had some really good leaders who kind of took me under their wing and mentored me. And like, if we weren't going to hire you here at Battle Site, from like the few months of experience we had working with you day in, day out, there would have been like a sit down, come to Jesus meeting about like, hey bro, we need to sit down and we need to civilianize and like make this resume something that a hiring manager actually wants to read. But you know, we made that hiring decision before I literally saw your resume this morning. I was like, what the hell? Like, this is terrible. Like, I didn't think I like threw it across the desk at Chris, and I was just like, I can't with this anymore.
All good takeaways. So where does this leave us? We've been going for a half hour, surprisingly, guys, which I think we thought we were going to struggle on this, but I think it's an indication of how passionate we are about this subject. And we've certainly had a lot of discussions in the office before we hit the play button here about this. So, but to kind of just play the role of wrapping up, hopefully we didn't have any technical difficulties. But this is a Friday at Battle Site. This is a typical Friday for us, discussing things like this. And hopefully we didn't have a technical problem here, but if we did, I guess we'll fix that somewhere down the road. Want to thank Nick and Dean and Dan for weighing in on this subject that we're pretty passionate about, as I mentioned. And hopefully there'll be more of these to come. But I think the summary here is, for folks in industry, you know, you have no idea what you're getting in a veteran and how much he can change the trajectory of your business. For folks in the military who are getting ready to transition out, don't drink that Kool-Aid that you can't add immediate value outside of defense. You can. You have very unique skills and training that simply isn't taught on the civilian side. So stay with it and hang in there. And like I said, don't buy into the narrative that you are one-dimensional. That's it. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll be back with something different soon.
And if you want to buy anything, battlesitetech.com.
Hit them up. If you need anything from Battle Site, hit them up.